Every empire swears its money is sound. Every state vows its promises will endure. And again, history proves them wrong. From Rome to France, from the Confederacy to modern Lebanon, people have awakened to find their savings hollow, their salaries meaningless, their futures bargained away by systems they assumed were solid. Collapse isn't an outlier, it's the pattern. The question isn't whether financial structures fail, they do. The question is how you protect yourself when they do. By the way, if you love money, subscribe to the channel and give it a like. Now let's continue. The most dangerous mistake is believing in permanence. We glance at account balances and national currencies and assume they're bedrock. But money isn't granite, it's confidence. And confidence can evaporate overnight. That's why history is both brutal and useful. Every breakdown leaves tracks, lessons, rhythms, warnings about what preserves wealth and what dissolves into dust. Look closely, and a theme emerges. The survivors weren't the ones who trusted longest. They were the ones who doubted first. Consider the Byzantine Empire, remembered as Rome's eastern heir, that outlasted its western sibling by a millennium. Its economy pivoted on the gold solidus, a coin so reliable that merchants from Europe to the Levant to Asia accepted it on sight. For centuries it functioned as the medieval world's reserve currency. You'd think they'd have learned from Rome's fiasco with the silver denarius, which emperors debased until it was little more than plated tin. We've told that tale before, yet centuries later, the Byzantines repeated the sin, in gold. Purity was shaved, alloys crept in, the substance thinned. At first, nobody noticed, then trust cracked. The solidus, once the anchor of Mediterranean trade, turned into a political fiction. Debasement destroyed credibility, and with it, the stability of a trading system that had seemed immovable. What endured? Not proclamations, not paper. Those who hoarded real gold, or owned land beyond imperial grasp, preserved wealth while others watched their money evaporate. That's the first lesson. Governments rarely resist the urge to dilute their money. When they do, value escapes to assets they cannot counterfeit. But collapse isn't always minted by rulers. Sometimes it detonates from outside. In the mid-14th century, the Black Death erased perhaps half of Europe between 1347 and 1351. Cities emptied, villages vanished, trade routes snapped. Yet the economics of plague were stranger than simple ruin. When half the workforce disappears, labor grows precious. Survivors demanded higher wages. Land and food, once scarce relative to people, became abundant. Families with liquidity, coin, goods, or simply the ability to work, gained leverage. Abandoned houses, idle fields, and cheap acreage turned Europe into a buyer's market for those still standing. If that sounds familiar, it should. During COVID-19, supply chains shuttered, governments printed trillions to keep gears from seizing, and inequality widened as those with liquidity purchased assets while paycheck-to-paycheck households fell behind. In the United States, housing prices ripped upward, equities rebounded at record speed, and millions scrambled to cover rent. The rhyme is clear. Pandemics redistribute wealth. They always have. Survivors of the Black Death climbed the social ladder through scarcity. Survivors of COVID with cash scooped up property, stocks, and businesses others could no longer hold. The lesson is harsh but true. Crises reward reserves and punish the absence of them. If pandemics reveal how quickly shocks invert an economy, Renaissance Florence proves that institutions that look too big to fail can fall in a week. In the 1340s, Florence was Europe's financial capital, ruled by banking dynasties like the Bardi and Peruzzi. They lent massively to kings, most disastrously to Edward III of England, who defaulted during his war with France. Once he stopped paying, the banks toppled. Depositors were ruined, trade froze, and Florence slid into turmoil. Ordinary citizens discovered that size isn't safety, and reputation isn't protection. The phrase, too big to fail, is as old as banking, and is false. Institutions exist to profit, not to guarantee your survival. When they fall on you. The pattern repeats, from Florentine crashes to Lehman in 2008 to Lebanese banks freezing accounts in 2019. Survival belongs to those who recognize that institutional promises are conditional, valid until the hour they aren't. The American Civil War is remembered for battlefields and emancipation, but it was also a financial war. Both sides learned that industrial-scale war demands industrial-scale money. The Union issued greenbacks, paper not backed by gold, but by the federal promise itself. The more paper that circulated, the less it bought. Inflation gnawed at trust. In the Confederacy, the problem became terminal. Graybacks were printed in torrents. By war's end, prices had surged by thousands of percent. Soldiers' pay died between payday and purchase. Families hauled sacks of notes that barely bought bread. By 1865, Confederate currency wasn't weak. It was dead. What mattered then weren't paper assurances, but hard things. Land, grain, gold, anything real. Ordinary Southerners watched savings turn to smoke. Opportunists with access to goods acquired property at fire sale prices. The lesson Americans seldom hear. The United States has already lived through a currency collapse. Protection did not come from trusting the paper in your pocket, but from holding value the system couldn't inflate away. Revolutionary France offers another case study in monetary self-destruction. In the 1790s, revolutionaries toppled the monarchy and seized church lands, then issued assignats, paper-backed, in theory, by confiscated property. The theory ruptured in practice. Each new issue diluted the last. Prices spiraled, wages stagnated, and the assignat withered into waste. Farmers refused paper and demanded goods or silver. Bread riots returned. The revolution devoured itself. Winners were not the patriots waving notes. They were the people holding food, specie, or land, assets the state could not print. 2 centuries on, Asia replayed the script at global speed. In 1997, a speculative attack on the Thai baht exposed heavy dollar-denominated borrowing pinned to an unsustainable peg. Once the peg snapped, foreign currency debts exploded. Capital fled. Indonesia, Malaysia, South Korea. Currencies collapsed in sequence, economies shrank, jobs vanished, and governments crawled to the IMF. The worst pain wasn't borne by the hedge funds that sparked the panic. It was borne by ordinary households whose savings shrank, mortgages doubled, and employers disappeared. Again, the pattern: those with dollars or offshore assets survived better than those anchored to local currency. Debt in someone else's money is a trap. In a storm, creditors swim, debtors drown. By now, the picture is consistent. Whether in revolutionary France, Civil War America, or modern Asia, the themes repeat. Paper fails. Debt shackles nations and families. Survivors aren't the loyalists to the system. They're the skeptics who prepare before the crack. And collapse isn't just history. It's current events. In Lebanon from 2019 onward, banks did what still seems impossible to many in the developed world. They shut the doors. Deposits were frozen, withdrawals rationed, and the local currency imploded. The Lebanese pound lost over 90% of its value. A lifetime of savings shrank to pocket change. Lines formed outside shuttered branches. Families begged for access to their own money and were told it was gone. Not just small savers, doctors, engineers, retirees, the middle class. Anyone who trusted the system was swept under. The lesson is blunt. Money in a bank is a loan to an institution that can decide, in crisis, not to pay you back. Those who fared best had diversified abroad, held real assets like gold or property, or kept cash beyond bank reach. Everyone else was trapped. If this feels distant, remember 2008. Americans watched foreclosures surge and pensions crater, while the very banks that detonated the crisis were rescued. In 2020, governments printed trillions to keep the machine alive, support that pumped up asset prices for the already wealthy as wages lagged. In 2023, regional banks in the United States failed in days as depositors bolted, proving again that too big to fail is a fairy tale we repeat until the day the doors slam. So how do you protect yourself when the center sags? History offers no single hedge. In Byzantium, the answer was gold. After the Black Death, it was liquidity to buy abandoned land. In Florence, it was refusing to bet your life on grand banks. In the Confederacy, it was hard goods. In France, food and property. In Asia, avoiding debt denominated in someone else's currency. In Lebanon, leaving before the locks clicked. The specifics change, the theme does not. Survival comes not from blind faith in paper or institutions, but from recognizing what retains value when illusions evaporate. But wealth isn't only what you own, it's what you can do. The durable winners weren't just people with gold or deeds. They were people who could create value when others could not. The baker who still produced bread, the smith who repaired tools, the farmer who fed a town, the merchant who moved goods across borders. They didn't merely survive, they rose. In every crisis, money loses meaning, but production never does. People still need to eat, mend, build, and trade. Those who meet those needs are rarely poor for long. In a crunch, capability turns into exchange, bread for repair, medicine for fuel, rides for safety. Stack your skills: production, logistics, sales, basic finance. So you keep pricing power when paper falters. Generalists who can cook, fix, code, organize, and sell outperform pure hoarders. Reputation becomes a currency. Reliable delivery beats any legal claim when courts stall. Build optionality. Portable tools, lean inventory, mobile clients, suppliers in multiple jurisdictions. Learn core market disciplines: costing, negotiation, hedging, working capital, turnover. Acquire micro-infrastructure ovens, printers, solar panels, filters, cold storage, so your craft avoids brittle grids. Design off-ramps. If your city locks down, if your bank freezes, if your supplier fails, you keep shipping. Hold convertible inventory people truly need: food, heat, repair parts, connectivity. Train in minimum viable accounting and cash management. Speed is trust. Cultivate cross-border routes and parallel payments. Cash, swaps, escrow. Aftershocks, durable fortunes come from systems. Repeatable, simple, profitable, defensible, not luck. Build real moats. That is the deeper shelter. Not blind faith in institutions, not the belief that governments or banks will save you, but a mix of real assets, real skills, and a sober understanding that illusions always end. Every crisis is a transfer, from the many who trusted to the few who prepared, from paper promises to tangible value, from passive savers to active builders. History shows the pattern. So the issue isn't whether things fall apart, they do. The issue is whether you'll be left clutching promises or holding something real. Practically, build in layers: an emergency float at home, transactional cash and resilient institutions, and slow money and real assets. Cut leverage, match maturities, shorten duration when uncertainty rises. Avoid foreign currency debt unless you earn in that currency. Write contracts with clear indexation, delivery, and remedies. Assume courts will be congested. Favor collateral that functions without permission. Inventory, tools, productive property. Reduce counterparty exposure with escrow, partial prepay, and split shipments. Test exits. Can you move workflows, suppliers, backups, and inventory within 48 hours? Map capital controls and withdrawal limits before they exist. Rehearse legal conversions and cross-border moves. Build mutual aid loops with neighbors and clients. Trust compounds under stress. Protect reputation. Deliver on time. Own mistakes. Keep records. Stock spares and practice maintenance. The cheapest lesson is a small failure you notice early. Upgrade digital security. Password managers, hardware keys, offline backups. Track signals. Spreads capital flight, payment frictions, rising settlement failures, political shocks, and predefined triggers for action. Review weekly, adjust monthly, and refuse narratives that ask you to ignore your own eyes. That is the deeper shelter. Not blind faith in institutions, not the belief that governments or banks will save you, but a mix of real assets, real skills, and a sober understanding that illusions always end. Every crisis is a transfer, from the many who trusted to the few who prepared, from paper promises to tangible value, from passive savers to active builders. History shows the pattern. So, the issue isn't whether things fall apart. They do. The issue is whether you'll be left clutching promises or holding something real. History doesn't repeat, but if you ignore it, it will flatten you the same. If you made it this far, drop a plus in the comments, your badge for finishing the deep dive. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more long-form stories where money, history, and power collide. Curious about earlier empires of capital? Check out our others video.